The boarding gate at Terminal C had a tense hum of ritual, announcements crackling overhead, boarding groups called in practice cadence, wheels of carry-ons clattering against the tile. The late afternoon sun slanted through the glass wall, painting stripes of gold across the waiting area. Beyond the windows, the sleek fuselage of Flight 328 gleamed, its logo reflecting on the polished surface of the jet bridge. First-class passengers were gathering in a small line, balancing designer totes and expensive headphones, ready to board before the crowd of economy. That's when the moment broke. "Sir, step aside. This line is for premium passengers only." The voice was clipped, sharp enough to slice through the noise of the terminal. Dozens of heads turned. A gate agent, blonde bob, press uniform, badge reading L. Crawford stood rigid behind her podium, hand frozen above the scanner. Her eyes weren't on the boarding pass she held. They were locked on the man standing in front of her, tall, dark-skinned, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit him like it had been cut yesterday. His leather carry-on sat neatly at his feet, polished shoes catching the light. He blinked once, calm. "That is my boarding pass." His voice was low, smooth, controlled. The kind of voice used to steering boardrooms, not pleading at gates. But Crawford didn't move to scan it. Instead, she lifted her chin, projecting disdain. "Sir, priority boarding is reserved for platinum status holders and our first-class clientele." She tilted the boarding pass in her hand, as if it were counterfeit. "I need you to step aside." The words landed heavy. A hush rippled outward, catching in the throats of passengers nearby. A woman in line clutched her designer purse tighter, edging away. A young man sitting by the charging station pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the record button. The man in the suit, Marcus Hayes, didn't flinch. His dark eyes stayed fixed on the agent, his hands folded loosely in front of him. "I am in the correct line," he said evenly. "Please scan the pass." The supervisor appeared then, a man in his 50s with silver mustache and a tie knotted too tightly. His badge read P. Reynolds. He took in the scene with a glance. Marcus standing calm, the gate agent bristling, the small crowd holding its breath, and his decision was made before any evidence was reviewed. "What's the problem here?" Reynolds asked, voice loud enough to assert authority. "This gentleman is attempting to board first class without authorization," Crawford replied briskly, her words practiced like she had said them before. She tilted the boarding pass toward her supervisor, as though holding proof of a crime. "He doesn't belong in this lane." Marcus exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, before answering. "That is incorrect." He extended his hand, palm steady. "If you will simply scan the pass." Reynolds cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Sir, we don't tolerate line cutting or fraudulent documents. If you'd like to fly coach, you're welcome to wait until your group is called. Otherwise, you'll need to clear the area." The word struck like a slap. Several passengers gasped. Someone whispered, "He's in a suit, for God's sake." Another muttered, "Just scan the thing." The young man at the charging station pressed record, his camera zooming in. The red blinked to life. Marcus's gaze moved briefly toward the watching crowd, then back to the supervisor. His expression never changed. "My boarding group is first class," he said calmly. "The seat is mine. I have paid for it. Your systems will confirm this." But Crawford was already shaking her head, lips curling into a smirk. "These kinds of fake passes are everywhere now," she said, loudly enough for everyone within 30 feet to hear. "People print them at home, think they can just stroll up and sit in premium." The hum of the terminal shifted. Whispers, murmurs, the faint buzz of live streams going live. A college kid 2 rows back whispered, "This is trending already. Check TikTok." Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and produced a slim, embossed card. He placed it carefully on the counter, the light glinting off its metallic sheen. "Platinum Executive," he said. The card was unmistakable to anyone who traveled frequently. Exclusive, rare, impossible to forge. Crawford glanced at it and rolled her eyes. "You can buy replicas of these online for $40, she said dismissively. She pushed the card back toward him without touching it directly, as if it were contaminated. A ripple of disbelief spread to the crowd. An older man in a blazer muttered, "That's a real card." I've only ever seen one. A woman with her toddler whispered to her husband. He has to be telling the truth. Still, Reynolds stood his ground. Sir, we've asked you politely. If you continue to create a disturbance, we'll have to involve airport security. Marcus glanced at his watch. 4:17 p.m. He was scheduled to be airborne by 4:30. His meeting was at 7 o'clock, boardroom across the ocean. Precision mattered. He closed the watch face with quiet snap and looked back up at Reynolds. You are making a mistake, he said softly. Reynolds straightened, puffing his chest as if challenged. The only mistake would be letting you board without proper authorization. At that moment, the gate door opened, and first-class passengers were waved down the jet bridge. Crawford ushered them past, her voice sweetening instantly. Welcome aboard, Mrs. Taylor. So lovely to have you with us. Enjoy the flight, Mr. Singh. Each passenger cast curious glances at Marcus as they passed, some offering sympathetic smiles, others avoiding his gaze. He remained still, hands folded, breathing slow, observing, documenting. A woman in a red scarf whispered to her phone camera. They're refusing him even though he clearly has the credentials. This is insane. Comments flooded her live stream. What's the airline? Sue them. This guy is definitely important. The tension spiked as two uniformed security officers approached, radios crackling. Reynolds gestured toward Marcus with exaggerated finality. This gentleman is attempting to board fraudulently. Please remove him from the area. The crowd inhaled as one. Cameras tilted higher. Children craned their necks. The entire gate had become an audience. Marcus bent down, lifted his leather carry-on by the handle, and placed it neatly by his feet again. He pulled a small notebook from his breast pocket, opened it, and began writing slow, deliberate strokes as though every letter mattered. He wrote the names on the badges, the time, the sequence of events. His handwriting was sharp, angular, precise. Crawford sneered. What, you're taking notes now? She laughed shortly, looking to the supervisor for validation. Reynolds chuckled. Some people just don't know when to quit. Marcus closed a notebook with quiet finality and slipped it back into his jacket. Then he looked up, and for the first time, his gaze met Reynolds's head-on. Dark, steady, unwavering. His voice was low but carried. I gave you the opportunity to correct this mistake. For a flicker of a moment, both Crawford and Reynolds hesitated, something in his tone landing heavier than his calm demeanor suggested. But the moment passed. Reynolds motioned sharply to the officers. Remove him. And with that, Act One closed, not with a man stepping aside in shame, but with a scene frozen in tension. Security moving closer, passengers recording furiously, and Marcus Hayes standing perfectly composed, like a man who knew the story was only just beginning. If you are enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The two security officers move in, one on either side of Marcus, their black boots heavy against the tile. Radios crackled on their belts. The taller one spoke first, his tone flat, but edged with authority. Sir, we're going to need you to step away from the gate. The air thickened. You could almost feel the collective intake of breath from the watching passengers. A row of teenagers near the window lifted their phones higher, lenses trained on the scene as if this were a performance stage just for them. Marcus remained steady. He picked up his leather carry-on, the weight familiar, grounding. My documents are valid, he said calmly, looking from one officer to the other. I am a first-class passenger. The error is not mine. The shorter officer exchanged a glance with Reynolds, who stood behind the podium with folded arms and smug certainty. Crawford leaned against her scanner, lips curled in a smirk. She was enjoying this. That was the part that stung the crowd most, not just a refusal, but the relish in it. Sir, we don't want to cause a scene, the taller officer repeated, though it was far too late. The scene had already spilled into every corner of the gate area. Screens glowed with live streams. Hashtags appeared in real time on TikTok, climbing with each refresh. Hashtag gate discrimination. Hashtag let him board. Hashtag flying while black. A voice rose from the seated passengers. A young woman in glasses stood, her phone streaming. He's not causing a scene. You are. Her words drew a murmur of agreement. Others chimed in, "Just scan the damn pass." "Why are you doing this to him?" Reynolds ignored them, keeping his focus on Marcus. "You can either step aside quietly, sir, or we will have you detained. Those are your choices." Marcus's jaw tightened a fraction, but his voice remained even. "Detained. For attempting to take the seat I lawfully purchased?" The taller officer shifted uncomfortably. The absurdity of the situation was beginning to creep in. Yet Reynolds pressed on, louder now, performing for the watching crowd. "Sir, you've been warned. Fraudulent boarding attempts are a criminal offense. This is your last chance." Fraudulent. The word rang through the terminal like a bell. Sharp, damning, and entirely unearned. Someone gasped. Someone else swore under their breath. A child asked his mother in a loud whisper, "Why won't they let him on?" The mother hushed him, eyes wide, not wanting to explain. Marcus let the silence hang for a moment, then pulled his notebook again. He wrote the word down, fraudulent, beneath the names he had already listed. The crowd leaned in, fascinated by the quiet act of documentation, in the face of humiliation. Crawford laughed, the sound brittle. "Taking notes won't help you, sir. You're not getting on this plane." The cruelty was casual, dismissive, but it hit with the weight of centuries. Marcus didn't look at her. He wrote, he closed the book, and he slipped it back into his pocket. The gate door shut with a heavy click. Final boarding call had passed. Passengers in first class were already sipping champagne, oblivious to the storm outside. The plane began to roll back from the gate, engines humming, unaware it was carrying the seeds of disaster far greater than turbulence. The crowd at the gate murmured louder now. Dozens of people had their phones raised, capturing every moment. "This is going viral," someone whispered. "Look, it's already on Twitter." Indeed, the hashtags were spreading like wildfire. Screens showed the view counts doubling, tripling. Journalists began commenting. "Anyone at Terminal C seeing this? DM me." Marcus stood in the middle of it all, calm but unsmiling, his presence almost unnerving in its stillness. Where another man might have raised his voice, demanded justice, pleaded for recognition, he simply waited. That silence spoke louder than shouting ever could. The shorter officer shifted again, lowering his voice. "Sir, maybe we can sort this out another way. If you just—" Reynolds snapped, cut him off. "No, he's done here. Escort him out of the terminal, if you have to." That snapped the crowd's patience. "Are you serious?" shouted a man in a baseball cap. "You can't treat people like this," a woman cried. "Scan the pass. It takes 2 seconds." Phones captured every word. The gate was no longer just a point of entry. It was a stage, and the audience was global. Marcus lifted his eyes and let them sweep the room. Not angry, not pleading, just steady. "Thank you," he said softly, to no one in particular, to the witnesses, to the lenses, to the record that was forming. Reynolds barked again, trying to regain control. Enough. Security, move him. But the officers hesitated now, caught between command of their supervisor and the awareness that hundreds of eyes, physical and digital, were watching. The taller one muttered into his radio, unsure. Crawford folded her arms, triumphant. "This is what happens when you try to sneak into first class." That line hit the internet before the echo faded in the terminal. Within seconds, the clip was online. Comments exploded. "Sneak in? He's dressed better than their CO. This is blatant profiling. They're done. This airline is done." Marcus finally bent, lifting his carry-on again. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. He simply straightened his shoulders and let the officers walk him a few paces back from the podium. His dignity was intact, even if they thought they had stripped it away. A ripple of sympathy passed through the passengers. Some clapped quietly, in solidarity, in protest. Others shouted encouragement. "We see you. You don't deserve this." The humiliation was sharp, undeniable. Yet in the quiet of his composure, something else stirred, an undercurrent of authority the crew hadn't recognized. Because Marcus Hayes wasn't just a man in a suit trying to board a flight. He was the man who owned the very skies they worked under. And though the crowd didn't know it yet, though the crew smirked in misplaced triumph. The foundation of the airline itself was beginning to shake. For now, though, all anyone could see was the image captured on hundreds of screens. A black man in a tailored suit, wrongfully denied, standing alone against a backdrop of authority gone rotten. The humiliation was complete, but the reckoning was only just beginning. The terminal pulsed with tension. Security lingered awkwardly by Marcus's side, radios hissing with half-finished instructions. Reynolds stood at the podium, chin high, trying to project victory while his eyes darted nervously toward the dozens of recording phones. Crawford busied herself with paperwork she didn't need, refusing to look at the man she'd just barred from first class. Passengers whispered in clusters, their voices sharp, incredulous. He didn't even raise his voice. They just threw him out like he was nothing. This is going to blow up so bad. Marcus remained where he stood, leather carry-on at his feet, posture unbent. He looked at his watch again. 4:28 p.m. 2 minutes until flight was scheduled to lift off without him. He exhaled once, then slid his hand into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The crowd hushed. Something about the way he moved, deliberate, unhurried, certain, drew every gaze. Even the officers leaned slightly closer. He tapped a single contact. The line rang once, twice, then a voice answered immediately, crisp and deferential. "Yes, Mr. Hayes?" Marcus spoke quietly, but the quiet carried. "Ground them." That was all. 2 words. Precise. Surgical. The line went dead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a ripple through water, the airport began to shift. Across the glass wall, Flight 328's nose wheel jerked to a halt. The jet bridge, which had been pulling away, reversed slowly, reconnecting. Beyond the runway, other planes that had been taxiing suddenly idled, their lights blinking as instructions crackled into cockpits. Announcement erupted over the loudspeakers, voices strained. "Attention passengers! All outbound flights with Atlantic Sky Airways are experiencing a temporary hold. Please remain in your gate areas for further updates." Gasps rippled through the terminal. Screens flickered with new alerts, delayed in bold red letters, not just for Flight 328, but for every Atlantic Sky departure on the board. Passengers whipped their heads toward Marcus. He stood motionless, phone now back in his pocket, his expression unchanged. "What the hell just happened?" someone whispered. Did he do that?" asked another. The live stream chats exploded. Comments scrolled faster than eyes could follow. "Who is this man?" "He just grounded the airline." "Oh my God, this is insane." Reynolds froze behind the podium, his smirk collapsing into confusion. He jabbed at his headset. "Control, this is Gate C-17. Why was the aircraft pulled back?" Static, then a frantic voice. "Stand by, sir. Senior Operations is issuing a directive. Hold all Atlantic Sky flights immediately." Reynolds' face blanched. He glanced at Marcus, then quickly looked away, as though staring too long might confirm a suspicion forming in the back of his mind. Crawford wasn't so composed. She barked a laugh, thin and nervous. "Coincidence? It has to be. Just bad timing." But the crowd wasn't convinced. Too many eyes had watched the sequence. Marcus's phone call, his words, the instant consequences. It wasn't coincidence. It was power. A woman in the front row of seats raised her phone higher, streaming close. "Sir," she called to Marcus, voice trembling with excitement. "Did you just stop the plane?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was its own confirmation. Reynolds' headset crackled again. "All station managers, be advised. Priority directive from Executive Command. Do not allow further departures. All flights suspended pending instruction from HQ." The room erupted. Passengers cried out in frustration, some demanding answers, others marveling at the unfolding drama. Reporters, alerted by the viral clips, began pushing to the crowd, cameras already rolling. A news anchor's voice cut through the chaos from a nearby TV tuned to a live feed. "Breaking news. Atlantic Sky Airways has just issued an unprecedented system-wide ground stop. Social media is speculating this is connected to a discrimination incident at Gate C-17. We have crews en route." Reynolds dropped his headset, color draining from his face. Crawford fumbled with her scanner, hands trembling. The two officers took a small step away from Marcus, as if realizing they'd been standing too close to something they couldn't control. Marcus bent once more, lifting his carry-on. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm but carried weight. "You should have scanned the pass." The crowd erupted in applause. Not wild cheering, not yet, but steady, deliberate clapping, a release of tension and outrage. The sound grew louder, phones capturing every second. Crawford's face flushed deep red. You can't just... But her words faltered as her earpiece chirped. A panicked voice from HQ barked instructions. "Suspend all operations at your gate. The passenger you refuse is being verified as executive authority." Reynolds snatched his own headset. "What do you mean executive authority?" His voice cracked. The reply was barely audible, but those closest heard it. "He's your boss." The word shot through the gate like an electrical surge. Passengers gasped. Someone shouted, "I knew it." The live stream comments exploded. "CEO confirmed?" "Oh, they're done." Crawford staggered back from her podium, eyes wide. Reynolds looked like he'd aged 10 years in 30 seconds. Marcus stepped forward, just enough so the cameras could catch his face clearly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My name is Marcus Hayes," he said evenly, "Chief Executive Officer, Atlantic Sky Airways." The terminal erupted. Screams, gasps, applause. Phones whipped into the air, capturing every angle. The live stream numbers surged into the tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Marcus continued, voice steady, measured, impossible to ignore. "You refused to scan my boarding pass. You accused me of fraud. You attempted to remove me from my own airline." Reynolds stammered, face ashen. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't know." That, Marcus cut in, his eyes cold, is the problem. Crawford tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her earlier bravado had dissolved into sheer panic. Behind them, the massive departure board continued flashing delayed and angry red letters. Dozens of flights, thousands of passengers, all halted by 2 words spoken over a single phone call. And in the center of it all stood the man they had dismissed, humiliated, and underestimated. The man who owned every jet parked on those runways. The reckoning had arrived, and it was only beginning. Chaos was no longer confined to Gate C-17. It was spilling across the entire terminal. Screens flashed red with delayed banners. Automated announcements stumbled over themselves, and passengers up and down the concourse stared at their phones, scrolling through clips of the confrontation unfolding live only yards away. But the epicenter remained Marcus Hayes. He hadn't moved much, just a small shift closer to the gate podium, his carry-on at his side, his presence commanding in its stillness. The crowd pressed tighter around him. The air charged, as though everyone instinctively knew they were witnessing history in real time. "Mr. Hayes, sir, please, we didn't." Reynolds' voice cracked, desperate now. The arrogance from earlier had drained from him, replaced by sweat beating at his temple. Marcus fixed him with a gaze that was steady but sharp. "You didn't what?" His words were low, deliberate. "Didn't judge me? Didn't accuse me of fraud? Didn't attempt to strip me of dignity in front of 100 witnesses?" The crowd hummed, restless, their voices rising in quiet affirmations. "He's right. We all saw it. It's on video." Crawford tried to speak, her lips trembling. "Sir, I was only following." Marcus cut her off, not with volume, but with precision. "You were following prejudice, not policy." The gate went silent. Then a new noise broke through, the whir of cameras. News crews had arrived, weaving through the onlookers with boom mics and blinding lights. Reporters pushed forward, microphones extended. "This is Sarah Lee with Channel 9 News. Sir, can you confirm you are Marcus Hayes, CEO of Atlantic Sky?" "Yes," Marcus said simply, turning toward the cameras so the world could see his face clearly. "I am." The reporters pounced, questions overlapping. "Did this crew refuse you service based on race? Why have all flights been grounded? What will happen to these employees?" Marcus raised a hand. The gesture was enough to silence the crowd, as though he were conducting an orchestra. "This afternoon," he said, voice steady, eyes fixed on the lens, "your cameras, your phones, and every witness in this terminal saw exactly what happened. I was denied boarding despite presenting valid credentials. I was accused of fraud in front of strangers. I was threatened with detention for insisting on my rights as a passenger." His tone hardened. "This is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern I have been documenting across our airline for months, a pattern of discrimination that will end today." The words landed like thunder. Applause erupted. Someone shouted, "About time!" The live stream comments poured in. "Icon. This is history. Accountability in real time." Reynolds looked like he might collapse. Crawford's face was frozen in horror. Marcus turned back to them, his voice surgical. "You accuse me of fraud, Miss Crawford. You dismiss my credentials, Mr. Reynolds. And when I gave you opportunities to correct yourselves, you doubled down." He gestured toward the crowd. "Now, you will face the consequences. Not behind closed doors, but here, before every witness you sought to humiliate." At that moment, both Reynolds's and Crawford's earpieces crackled. The frantic voice of corporate HR blared through. "Effective immediately. You are suspended pending termination review. Security will escort you off the premises." Gasps rippled through the gate. Crawford's knees buckled. Reynolds sputtered. "This can't, Mr. Hayes, please. I've worked here 20 years. 20 years, Marcus echoed. "And yet you couldn't treat one passenger with basic respect." Security officers, the same who had nearly dragged Marcus out, stepped forward again, this time not for him, but for them. The reversal was poetic. Phones zoomed in, capturing every detail as Reynolds and Crawford were quietly led away, faces pale and careers in ashes. Reporters shoved closer. "Mr. Hayes, what happens now? How long will flights remain grounded?" Marcus faced the cameras directly. His next words would define the moment. "No plane bearing this airline's logo will leave the ground until Dignity does too," he declared. "We will not resume operations until our passengers can trust that they will be treated with respect. Every passenger, every time." The terminal exploded in applause. Some cheered, others whistled, some simply cried. Strangers clasped hands, united in outrage and relief. At that same instant, TV screens throughout the airport flickered to a breaking news feed from headquarters. The airline senior leadership, seated at a long table, microphones trembling in front of them. The COO's voice was shaky as he read from a prepared statement. "We at Atlantic Sky Airways acknowledge the gravity of today's incident. Effective immediately, the employees involved are suspended. A full-scale investigation is underway. We apologize to Mr. Hayes, our CEO, and to every passenger who witnessed this unacceptable behavior. Systemic reforms are being expedited at the highest level." The disconnect was almost comical. Executives groveling on national television, while the man they addressed stood only a few feet away, calm and unshaken, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses. Reporters turned back to him. "Mr. Hayes, are you satisfied with the response from your leadership team?" Marcus's reply was ice cold. "I don't need their apology. I need their action. And so do our passengers." Phones buzzed nonstop. Hashtags trended globally now. Hashtag Grounded for Justice. Hashtag Marcus Hayes. Hashtag Airline Accountability. Millions were watching live. One passenger, an elderly woman in a floral scarf, shuffled forward, her voice trembling. "Mr. Hayes, thank you. People like me, we've been treated poorly for years. Nobody ever listened. You made them listen." Marcus inclined his head gently. "It should never have taken this much." His eyes swept the crowd. "But since we're here, let's make it count." Applause swelled again, louder this time, echoing off the high glass walls of the terminal. Even the officers nodded, their earlier embarrassment replaced with respect. And then, almost poetically, every screen lit up with breaking alerts. All Atlantic Sky flights suspended until further notice. CEO demands sweeping reforms. The humiliation of one man had transformed into accountability for an entire corporation. And Marcus Hayes stood at the center, unmoved by chaos, Unshaken by noise, the calm force that had grounded an airline with a single phone call. But everyone knew this wasn't the end. This was the turning point. The real transformation, the permanent change, was still to come. The following morning, the world looked different. Airports across the country buzzed with a new kind of chatter. Screens at coffee kiosks and lounges replayed the clips from Gate C-17 on a loop. The gate agent sneering, Reynolds barking, the security guard circling. And in the reversal, Marcus Hayes uttering 2 words that silenced engines and grounded an empire. Hashtag Grounded for Justice was still trending at #1. Cable news anchors dissected every frame. Legal experts debated precedent. And civil rights leaders praised the quiet composure with which Marcus had turned humiliation into history. But the true weight of the story was unfolding inside a press conference at Atlantic Sky's headquarters. Rows of journalists filled the atrium, microphones bristling like a forest of steel. Cameras flashed as Marcus stepped up to the podium. No security detail, no entourage, just himself, his leather briefcase at his side. He looked out at the crowd, then into the lenses broadcasting to millions. Yesterday, you saw an airline humiliate one of its passengers, Marcus began. His tone was steady, almost conversational. What you did not know, at least not at first, was that the passenger happened to be its CEO. That detail shocked many. It shouldn't have mattered. The way I was treated would have been just as wrong if I had been anyone else. The room stilled. You could almost hear the reporter's pens scratching. Marcus opened his briefcase, pulled out his leather journal, and set it on the podium. I have documented 147 incidents of passenger complaints related to discrimination across our airline in the last 18 months. Most were dismissed, minimized, or explained away as misunderstandings. Yesterday, you saw proof that the system is broken, live, unfiltered, undeniable. He flipped the journal open, revealing pages filled with sharp, precise handwriting. Cameras zoomed in. The image of neat columns, dates, times, employee names flashed across live feeds. It was the anatomy of systemic failure, preserved line by line. But today, Marcus continued, his voice gaining force, marks the start of something else. Effective immediately, Atlantic Sky Airways will implement reforms unlike anything this industry has seen. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. The bullet points appeared on the screens behind him. Mandatory cultural bias training for all 42,000 employees, from executives to part-time staff, completed within 60 days. Anonymous reporting platform for passengers and employees, with direct oversight by the CEO's office. Monthly diversity audits conducted by independent firms. Results published publicly. Zero-tolerance enforcement. Any act of discrimination results in termination. No exceptions, no warnings. Reporters shouted questions, but Marcus pressed on. This is not about damage control. This is about accountability. It is about making sure what happened to me, and to countless others whose names you don't know, never happens again. Not here, not anywhere. Applause erupted in the atrium. Unusual for a press conference, but unstoppable. Some reporters even stood, clapping with a crowd of staff, and stakeholders gathered in the wings. The feed went global. Morning talk shows played the speech in full, commentators marveling at its clarity. Social media lit up with one phrase, not damage control, accountability. But Marcus wasn't done. He leaned closer to the podium, voice lowering into something intimate, almost confessional. Let me be clear, he said. Grounding our flights was not a stunt. It was a demonstration. If an airline cannot guarantee dignity to its passengers, then it does not deserve to fly. Yesterday, Atlantic Sky failed. Today, we begin the work of ensuring we never fail again. The applause this time was thunderous, rising to the atrium's glass ceiling. That evening, the ripple effects began. Bookings initially plummeted. Fear, scandal, uncertainty. But within days, a different pattern emerged. Customers flooded the airline's app with comments of support. Fly Atlantic Sky, because they're the only ones taking this seriously. Thank you for standing up for dignity. This is where I want my money to go. Numbers rebounded, then climbed. Competitors scrambled to issue their own policy updates, but none carried the authenticity of CEO who had lived the humiliation himself. Inside the company, Reforms were swift. Crawford and Reynolds were terminated without severance. Their names became synonymous with arrogance and bias. Case studies for corporate training. The officers who hesitated, who had paused instead of blindly obeying, were retained, retrained, and promoted into leadership for showing judgment under pressure. Employees across the network attended intensive workshops, some grumbling at first, but gradually a shift took root. Flight attendants reported higher morale. Passengers noticed more warmth in greetings, more patience in service. Surveys showed customer satisfaction climbing by double digits. The world had seen Marcus Hayes grounded in Airline. Now, they were watching him lifted higher than ever before. 6 months later, the transformation was undeniable. Atlantic Sky's quarterly earnings surpassed projections, driven by an unprecedented surge in loyalty. Civil rights organizations cited the airline as a model for reform. Universities requested case studies. The Department of Transportation publicly praised the Transparency Initiative. And then came the most symbolic moment of all. Marcus arrived at Gate C-17 again. This time, no cameras had been invited. He carried his same leather briefcase, with the same measured calm. Passengers waiting for a morning flight recognized him instantly. A hush fell, then applause spread, louder and louder until the entire gate was standing. The gate agent on duty, a young Latina woman, scanned his boarding pass with shaking hands. She looked up at him, eyes brimming with respect. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Hayes," she said softly. "We're honored to have you with us." Marcus inclined his head, not with pride, but with gravity. "Thank you. I'm honored to be here." As he walked down the jet bridge, the passengers broke into cheers. Not the polite applause of corporate ceremonies, but raw, grateful celebration for dignity restored, for justice demanded, for a system change because one man refused to be humiliated quietly. Inside the aircraft, the captain stepped out of the cockpit, saluted him, and said, "On behalf of this crew, sir, thank you for giving us an airline we could be proud of." Marcus settled into his seat, the hum of engines beneath him. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to exhale fully. Not relief, the work was far from over, but a quiet affirmation. Power had not been revealed in anger or vengeance. It had been revealed in composure, in resolve, in the refusal to accept indignity as the cost of travel. And from that moment on, every plane that carried Atlantic Sky's logo carried something else, too, the knowledge that dignity was no longer negotiable. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.